Miv Accordia agus fáilte hig Sword Colmcille Ardús. You're welcome to Swords Historical Society's centre in the old Carnegie Library in Swords. We've been here since 1988 and we've a collection of photographs and artefacts and a museum and genealogy centre. But the idea today is to add to our commemoration of the 1916 Rising, and we have done research on the locals in Colmcille's graveyard, and we discovered that there's at least 26 people there who are actually involved in the Rising. And we want to bring it up to date and make connections with the school. So I'm going to introduce you to Dr. James Bennett, who is the headmaster in the school. He worked there for over 40 years. And my personal opinion of Jim was that I've known a lot of teachers that were there that have come and gone, but he was very interested in local history, more swords than the swords people themselves, and he made sure all the lads knew all about the past, and he's done several projects with them. So I think he's no better man now to tell you a little bit more about the links with the schools that we hope to bring in on the graveyard.
Now, Bernadette has mentioned that there are over 20 people who were involved in 1916 buried in the graveyard in Swords. And we have to, while we wish to be inclusive, we obviously have to be selective as well. So we don't mean any offence if we concentrate on people who lived on the main street or its hinterland and or attended the Newborough Boys' School. That's the school of which I was proud to be principal when it became St. Colmcille's BNS. And to link the 1916 era with the present, there's a plaque in our school since 1968. It was on the 50th anniversary of the death of one of the people involved, Rishtara Colmcille. And the other link with that is that it was unveiled by Eamon de Valera Uachtarán na hÉireann. Now, because we're looking at the links between past and present, we're going to look at the main street and what it was like for the people who lived there. We have some beautiful photographs. Bernadette has them here in the Historical Society.
Well, this is a picture of Swords Main Street. We're going to show a couple of them here, and it's just to give an idea of, they were taken at the turn of the 20th century, and they give an idea of what Swords was like in 1916. That particular one, if you look straight down, you can see a house with a lot of trees on it, which belonged to people called Duffs, who were involved in the Rising. And this is from the top of the town. The one on the left-hand side belonged to people called Walshes, who were pump borers, and they were related to Colemans, which we'll be mentioning a lot later on. The detached one on the right-hand side was Howard's the Butchers. That's North Street, I don't know. Oh yes, well on the corner we had Ryan's Forge, which were later belonged to Julia Weston and Thomasina, which we'll be talking about. Well, this is, I think, must be a very old photograph of Swords Castle, because all the old photographs we have in the collection, there was always a gap there beside the pub, which is gone now as well. You can see it there on that one. But those people coming out, you see the castle belonged to Cobbs of Newbridge House, and they would look like associates of the Cobbs. But that was a thatched house, and of course they were a regular thing in Swords. The pound was, of course, part of the castle domain. It was originally the pound where they took in stray animals, and you had to pay a fine for having them roam around the street. Well, that, of course, as we knew it when we were growing up, was Pentoney's Mill. It was also belonged to the castle domain. It was a corn mill where people brought in their corn to be processed. But it was all knocked down in the 1970s, I think, and it's now the Castle Shopping Centre. This is an interesting one. It's a very old one of Taylor's The Star, and the one at the side that would be in the 1930s, because they were Fagans, they were saddle makers, and it was a kind of a place where all the old fellas used to go in and chat, and it was knocked down to make the Chapel Lane wider. And Taylors, it looks quite good there, because that's the original star which was burned by the Black and Tans. That's what that picture is about, and you can see that it's very new looking in the other one, because I think people got compensation afterwards when their places were burnt by the Black and Tans. Swords House, which for generations was the home of the Taylors of Swords, but the connection with 1916 is that the Coleman family worked there. There's a record on their headstone. They worked for the Taylor family in Swords House. This one is what we used to call the Gut. It was a little road. It's still there. It's McDonald's is on the corner of it now. It's a little road between the main street and the Malahide Road. The interesting one, the first one, was where Kit Moran, that we mentioned, who was in the Battle of Ashbourne, he lived there. And we talked about the different backgrounds of these people who were in the Rising. Kit's father was actually the RIC sergeant in Swords for a while, so that was where they lived. I found about 25 or 26 people buried there who are actually in the Rising. There are a few more that came to live in Swords and are buried that have interesting stories, so we'll mention them as well. And I think it's a nice way to remember them, Jim.
It is
what
indeed.
Do you think?
It is indeed. And
yeah.
we'd say we're linked, and we obviously have the church, we have the graveyard, the schools, and it's very nice. Now, it will also give us reasons why we may have to speak about some and not speak about everybody.
Yes.
But we will list everybody. And
yes.
Everybody will be listed, but we can't do the same level of detail on everybody. So we don't mean any offence by excluding anybody.
That's right.
Okay?
That's right.
So I think that should be our mission for this morning.
Yeah.
Well, where are we starting?
Yeah, well, this one is the nearest, Jim, so maybe we'll go there first. It's a man called Peter Early who actually fought at the Battle of Ashbourne, and I only came across information on him very recently by accident. And then I found out that the headstone was here.
Very good. Now, is that Early from the main street?
They were from the main street, but not the ones you're thinking of, I think.
I'm thinking of a hotel, yeah.
No, I think they were farmers, and they lived on the main street as well. And I remember just an anecdote a long time ago when I interviewed old Joe Savage. He used to talk about somebody called the Wretch Early, who used to drive a pony and trap, and he used to keep beating the horse and saying, "You wretch."
You're wretch, that's right. That's
and I think that
name.
Might have been another family. I'd say they were cousins of the other people,
right. Okay.
because I came across a photograph of this man, and he looked very well dressed and that, so I'd say they weren't, they could have been farmers as well,
Okay, so that's our first one.
Yeah, that's the first one.
Good. Very good.
And as I said, I came across it by accident. None of the family live around Swords now, but we're in touch with them. Some guy emailed me to say that his grandfather came from Swords. And this man's son is still alive. He's 80 something, but they don't live around here at all. But they've been in touch, so they were delighted that we mentioned them, But he was one of the ones who fought in the Battle of Ashbourne.
Very good. Yeah.
And the headstone is so near the church. That's how you know they're old Swords
the old family.
The old family.
To the church. Yeah. Very good.
Yeah.
Now, our next one, Bernie, is Taylors, I think. Am I right?
Yeah, well, all the Taylors have buried the various headstones here up the top of the hill. So there were 3 of the Taylors in the Rising. So we'll talk about them now. We'll go up and have a look. The one that I see, what the name is very plain on, is Thomas Taylor. And he was the eldest of the Taylor family. And he seems to be very much in evidence in a lot of reports you see about the Rising. And then there was Joseph, who was... he's mentioned as well. He died young. I think he fought but they all fought at the Battle of Ashbourne, and I think he died in his 20s. And then there was Christie, who was the man that used to run what we used to call the warehouse on Swords Main Street. So they're the 3 Taylors, and then as well as that, some of the daughters we were incumbent them on as well. I think they were all a very Republican family at the time,
No.
And the pub was eventually burnt by the Black and Tans in 1922, so.
Strong links. Now, Joseph Taylor has a family link with yourself, isn't that right? I saw in the witness statement where he called an a trap for your dad.
That's right, yeah.
James,
yeah. It was like as if they were going around telling everyone it was on.
Making it up as they went along, yeah.
Telling them that the Rising was on.
The fact that the RIC barracks was next door.
That's right.
And that Mrs. Taylor's relations were so good with them.
Yeah.
That they warned her when the pub was going to be burned down.
Yeah.
That they actually gave her word, to get the lads out.
Yeah, but to get back to 1916, I was reading those, you know, those old Irish Independents that they brought out that I collected.
Oh yes,
them.
I have them. Yes.
And there is one. It says on the Wednesday of the Rising that Thomas Ashe walked up, and he walked into the RIC barracks and held it up with that Dr. Hayes, and then eventually all the other guys appeared, and then they broke in and got into the post office next door as well. And then there's something in it said that there happened to be a horse-drawn bread van coming down the town, and they commandeered that, and took all the bread out of it and put it in their own car and went off down to Donabay.
One we've come to, up to now we've been talking about people who are natives of the town, Bernadette.
That's right.
Arthur P. Agnew has a very interesting biography.
Yes, he's not a native of the town, but he has a very interesting story to do with 1916, and you can see his family have a beautiful wreath there on the grave. But Arthur Agnew came over from Liverpool to fight in the GPO, or in Dublin, in 1916, and he was one of the people who lodged in Kimmage on land belonged to Count Plunkett, and they became known as the Kimmage Garrison. So he fought in the GPO, and he ended up then, like a lot more of the guys, in Frongok camp. And just to tell you how he came to be in Swords, he became very friendly with the Kellys that I mentioned before, Peter Kelly and Jack Kelly in particular, from the Rathbeen Road. So eventually he went back to, I think the family were from Belfast originally. He got married in Belfast, and then in the 1940s he came and settled in Swords because he knew the Kellys. Right. And the first thing he did, I'm not sure where they lived. They did end up living in Seatown Villas, but I'm not sure where they lived before. But he did run the post office down on North Street at one stage, and he was very, I remember when I was a child, he was very active, like Paddy Gerard is in the church now. He was very active around the church, doing things in the church, and very nice, quiet kind of man. So that was Arthur Agnew, and we're delighted they all settled here. His family are still around, and some of them are fairly well known. As you could recognise the name. His son Arthur, who only died early this year, was a beautiful singer, tenor. He had won the Feis Ceoil a couple of times, and he used to sing in the choir here in the church. And when I was a child, Arthur was big, and we used to have the 40 hours celebration every year, and Miss Bell, who was the teacher, she always got very worried if Art didn't turn up to sing the song, or to sing the song. Yes. So then, of course, his son David now is quite famous as a musician, and he's well known.
Married to Twink,
that's right.
And the daughter
Chloe.
So she couldn't miss it.
Chloe, yeah, I was talking to Chloe at the launch of one of the things earlier on, and I said to her, you know, you have it on both sides, you know. So she, nice girl. So I said, I remember your grandfather singing in the choir. So she was very interested, you know. So that's who Arthur Agnew is.
Now, up to now, Bernadette, we've looked at men. So I think it's very important in terms of balance.
Oh yes,
that we see the role like the coming on and the women had in the rising. So we've now come to a Weston grave. Yeah,
well, this is the grave of Thomasina Linders, who was a Weston, and her sister Mary Julie Weston. Yeah, we were just saying that Thomasina Linders. Well, she was a Weston. Linders is an unusual name as well. I think they came in at one stage, if I'm not making a mistake, they came to live on Lambay Island. But Thomasina, Jim, like it's derivation of Thomas, I suppose.
That's right. That was a Scottish tradition where the girl took on the father's name.
Yes.
I mean, the most up to date in terms of would be the former Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK.
Yeah.
Nigel Lawson. His daughter's name was Nigella. So it's the same origin.
Well, you get Georgina,
and Patrice.
Henrietta.
Patrice, yes. Where the father's where there was a feminized version of the father's name.
Yeah. It's interesting. Now, if you were like me and you went to school in the 1940s and 50s in Swords, you would have bought your sweets at the little sweet shop at the corner of the Seatown Lane.
Gobstoppers and
things. And all these, Honeybee and all, etc. And like little did we know at the time that these two old ladies that looked at butter wouldn't melt in their mouth were there with the shop. But I had looked up, like they were very active in coming them on, and they like if to read their witness statement and that they were and then of course they were their brother was Charles Weston, who was one of the leaders over at the Battle of Ashbourne as well. So they're not really from Swords. They're from Turvey. So I think they were baptised in Donabate. They would have been in Donabate parish, and they're linked up then with another family that's prominent. Their mother was a McAllister. So if you look at a lot of these people that were in the 1916 rising around here, they all seem to be connected with each other.
Yes,
you know. So as I said, Mary Julia and Thomasina, as I said, I remember these two little old ladies, little benign ladies like that, and like to read what they did, you wouldn't think they had it in them, but they did their bit for the freedom of Ireland.
And that up to date as well.
Yeah.
Charlie Weston, the independent reporter,
right.
would be related.
They'd be his grandaunt.
Grandaunt, that's right, that's related.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting because it's very important in terms of balance that we include the women when we're talking about this.
That's right, yeah. And then before how they came to have that shop, it belonged to, when I was very small, there was an old lady called Mary Ryan owned it, and the Ryans were there for generations. And I think, I'm not sure, I didn't get a chance to finish researching how they were related, but the thing about eventually Paddy Weston, who's Charlie's father now, that you mentioned, he eventually owned it. It was left to him, and I looked up his baptism, and Mary Ryan was his godmother.
Right.
So I think that this is the connection. But they owned that shop there for generations, and they also owned the local forge. Ryan's Forge was at the corner there. So they're quite a historic family, even though we wouldn't call them old Swords. But I'd say because they were so long down in the shop, they probably bought the grave here, and that's how they're there. So we're delighted to have them here.
It's lovely.
Yeah.
Lovely to recognise and to get in terms of balance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now,
just as we're leaving Bernadette, this section of the graveyard, I know there are a few people that are very close to you that you want to mention.
Yeah.
Alva Winnicon in particular is a person very close to your heart.
Well, Mr. Monaghan is big. Alva Winnicon, and I only found out, I didn't know he was buried here. Tá sé curran seo Alva Winnicon as Bale Fersta, ag bhí sé mar ige Alan in Son Gorham School of Sword Colmcille Nor bhí Misha. Well, it's all good. Well, bhí sé conjugated. It's a man called Alva Winnicon, or Alfie Monaghan. He came from Belfast, and he was very, very active in Republican places. He was active down in Galway all the time, second in command to Liam Mellows, and he has a witness statement which is worth reading. He ended up like between Houghton and Tron not going to jail. It says he went on the run and he changed his name, and he seems to have been going all over Ireland doing things for the IRA and that. But eventually, and how we knew him here in the 1950s, he came to teach. Sorry about that. He came to teach art in the local technical school. We were there, but we always called him Mr. Monaghan. But he was Alva, and he was an artist. He was not a graphic artist. Didn't have those then. I think that's only on computers, isn't it? But he was a wonderful artist, and he used to write children's books on Gaelic, and he worked with Brian O'Higgins. You might remember when you were young all these lovely Christmas cards we used to get with all the Irish book-held designs. And Brian O'Higgins was also a veteran of 1916 Cavan man, but Alva Winnicon worked with him. Eventually, another thing I found out lately, he was also on the committee that erected the monument over Ashbourne. He was on the committee.
Sean T. O'Kelly.
Yes, he was a member of that committee as well. And he ended up living in Swords over on the Rathfield Road, and we knew him, and he used to come in every week to teach us art, and he was always us Gaelic, and he was wonderful. He used to teach us a lot of general knowledge as well when we'd be painting and whatever we got up to. But he was a lovely man.
Right, Bernadette, we've come to the Kelly grave now.
Yeah.
O'Kelly.
O'Kelly, yeah. Jack? Yeah. Father O'Kelly, August Jack Kelly, who was known as the Dodger. There were two brothers from the Rathfield Road, and their families are still around. I went to school with one of the daughters. But Father was a lieutenant, I think he called himself, at the Battle of Ashbourne. And Father was, he always used his name as Gaeilge. Now the other brother, Jack, who was known as the Dodger, he was one of the ones that was sent into town. You know, we know the story of the rising here, that the 20 of the men were sent into Dublin to fight.
That's right, into the GPO first. And then sent on to the Mendicity.
But he was one of the ones that was kept in the GPO because he was a huge, big, tall fellow, I believe. And they wanted somebody to break holes in walls and
be able to dig as well.
Make their way down to Henry Street as they did. So that's Jack the Dodger, and he, as I mentioned before, he's the man that Arthur Agnew got to know and consequently came to live in Swords. So that's Pather. And then Pather eventually, the thing about these people who are they're very sad, if you read it up, Pather was a civil servant and he lost his job because he'd been in the rising, and which happened to a lot more of them. But a long time, eventually he was reinstated, I think. But I remember him like an elderly man when I was a child. As I said, I went to school with his daughter. But there are two more now who are very prominent in 1916. Yeah. And they would have gone to school here in Swords. And
that's right. Well, I can link up that because both Jack and Pather won what was called colloquially the fee. It was a kind of a scholarship scheme.
That's right.
The correct name for it was an exhibition.
Yeah.
The older of the two lads won it in 1901 and the other boy won it in 1910.
Yeah.
Now, if he won the fee in 1910, and was still in primary school, or the end of primary school. Now, they went to school longer, so he might have been 14 or 15. He was a very, very young man.
Yes.
To be involved in the Rising in 1916.
Yeah, but they did go to school longer, because do you remember when we found the old roll books, they had some classes where they used to go in on Saturdays, and some of them were 15 and 16 years. Isn't that right?
That's right. There was a 7th and an 8th class. And you see, because there was no post-primary schools.
That's right.
There was and the other thing was, you had to be careful the year of the fee.
Yeah.
Because there were only 3 fees.
Yeah.
So you stayed it as long as you gave yourself a chance of winning it.
Yeah.
So one year might be very bright.
Yes.
So you stayed the following.
Yeah.
So both of those lads won the famous fee. And just if I can fill it in as well, the 3 prizes in the fee, the first prize was £18, the second prize was 15, and the third prize was 12. That was phenomenal money.
An awful lot of money.
Because I link it in for you. I started teaching in 1969 on £12 a week. So if you go back 100 years and you're winning a prize worth 80,
a lot of money.
A significant amount, and it made a serious start to a person in life.
Yeah, and the other thing worth mentioning there, you see Catherine Kelly, their mother, she was also a Wilson. So they're connected with Peter Wilson, who was killed in the Mendicity.
That's right, carrying a white flag.
The same family, yes.
Northern Mercy, carrying a white flag, they reckon he was shot in the back coming out of the Mendicity when he was trying to surrender.
That's right,
okay.
That's right, yeah.
Now, Bernadette, as we're after leaving the old part of the graveyard, I think it would be remiss of us not to mention your late dad, James.
That's right, yeah. And he's buried over there under the tree, and with the Marxes, and my mother is buried down here, and that's a funny family story that we won't go into now, but she didn't want to be buried with the Marxes or something.
All right, okay, that is fair enough, everyone to their own.
No, they were, it was just something that happened over a grave, and I make it funny, you know me, but yes, my father, and he was I don't know, I've never had a conversation with him. Unfortunately, I was only 6 months old when he died. He was a lot older than my mother, you see, but he must have been always talking about it, because my mother was always telling me what he told her, and with all this stuff online now, I found she was quite accurate in a lot of the stuff she said and that about him, you know. But he was like, maybe we'll put some photographs in later. He was a mad-looking young fellow with a big head of black curly hair. The Marxes all had black curly hair, but I'm not sure where they came from in Swords. Like, I can go back 3 generations here, but you get the name a lot up in the north, you know.
That's right.
And then the other side of the family, Mommy's mother was a Cleary, and they're actually related to the Colemans that we're going to talk about. Right. So that's another connection in my family, you know. But my father ended up being one of the guys that was sent into town, into Dublin, and did the Mendicity, and he was sentenced to death. And I'm always saying it's a good job it was commuted to penal servitude, otherwise I wouldn't be here.
There you are, Bernadette. These are the joys.
Yeah, so this is it.
And the other one, James Hearn.
James Herden is Liam. Liam is a member of our committee. Yeah, James Herden was only a young fella. Of the family originally came from Carlow, and I think they lived around the North Strand. And he was about 16 in 1916. He should be saying this himself. And there is a picture. Liam always says there's a picture. If you ever saw that film Mish Era, and you can see O'Connell Street and this young fella running across to the GPO, and he says the feeling it might have been his father, because this is what. But he eventually he ended up in Frongoch and Ballykinner and all these places. But why he's buried here in Swords is his wife was Stacia Howard, whose mother I think, was a lawless. So that's the connection again. So
back again to the connection.
You know, so there was all this connection. So that's how James Harden came to be buried here.
And just the two, Bernadette, because both of them are prize winners of this famous fee as well, that we should mention again.
That's right.
Christopher Morn.
Yes.
And Christopher Nugent. Now, Christopher Morn wasn't known as Christopher. He was known as Kit, isn't that right?
Yeah, or Fooster.
Or Fooster. Oh, lovely.
Fooster,
yeah. We're now down at Rishtard of Colman, the Coleman grave. Now, I think you want to say something about Rishtard first.
Yeah, well, this is the old Coleman grave. I'd say that Thomas Coleman would have been his grandfather, and Margaret Coleman. And you see, it says that they died at Swords House. They seem to have been involved with the tailors of Swords.
Oh, they were servants, yeah. They worked in the house,
and Colonel Foster and that. But Richard, or Dick Coleman, as they called him at the time, was in the rising. He was when Commandant Connolly asked for reinforcements.
That's James Connolly.
James Connolly,
yes.
I didn't know Commandant Connolly, James Connolly, Thomas Ashe picked out 20. He was looking for 40 men, but he could only afford to send 20. And Richard Coleman was the leader of these guys who went into town. So I believe my father was included. They walked from Knocksadan in through Dublin, in through Fairview and down O'Connell Street and into the GPO, and then Richard Coleman and I don't know, 5 of them I think ended up going to the Mendicity, and others were kept elsewhere around. As I said, the Kelly guy that was breaking down walls, the big fella. But Coleman, they all ended up in Lewis prison. Most of the guys, now the records seem to show that most of the guys that were in Ashbourne ended up in Frongok, but my father, it was in Lewis prison, and Coleman and De Valere and a lot of them were all there, and Thomas Ashe, because I think they were in town. I think they were caught first, and that they were court-martialed and that, and as I said, sentenced to death, but it was commuted to penal servitude. But and as I said, the guys from Ashbourne they were let out after a few months, a lot of them. But my father didn't come home with a lot of these, and probably Coleman, till June 1917. And the thing about my own father, now just to talk, why I keep Coleman's, because somewhere along my granny on my mother's side was a Cleary, and there's some connection between the Clearys and the Colemans.
Okay.
And they were all, I suppose, it was the same in every town. People didn't move around so much. Probably were all related to each other. But Richard Coleman, when he came home, he became he was involved again, and he was on the run, and he was arrested again, and then he ended up in a prison called Usk in North Wales, and in 1918,
that's right, yeah. Conditions were horrific there.
Terrible. He got pneumonia and he died. Now there is another big Coleman grave, all written on Gaeilge up further, and it's mentioned that Richard's brother, called Philip or Phelim, and he was also involved in the rising, and he died at 24 years of age. I think he was in some kind of an explosion or something as well, but he died young, but he's buried there as well. Phelim Coleman, he would be buried. But this Richard is not buried here. You can see the little plaque there, that his nephew, who was also Richard, he was very devoted to all this. He used to come out to me, and he's only a couple of years dead. I'm still in touch with his daughter, she comes out. But he put that plaque there just to remind people that he was in, because a lot of people thought he was buried in Swords, that he's in the Republican plot in Glasnevin.
Yeah, well,
and you have a connection with the school as well.
I can fill out a bit there.
Yeah.
Richard's dad, John, was a monitor.
Yes.
Now, a monitor was an untrained teacher.
Yeah.
Before teachers went into training colleges.
Yeah.
And there was a bit of class distinction. The monitors always got hardship from the inspectors rather than the trained teachers.
Yeah.
And Richard he went to be a priest, he went to be a Christian brother and so on.
Right,
but when his nephew called to see me, there's a very fine plaque outside our staff room, and I asked about the provenance of it, and what he explained to me was that the family didn't want it outside in case it was vandalised. Yeah. And it was erected in 1968 on the 50th anniversary of his uncle's death by Eamon de Valera. Mr. de Valera came here to Mass, an elderly man at the time, didn't want any publicity. I went up then and unveiled the plaque.
Yeah.
And I met Richard on a number of occasions.
Yeah.
Lovely man.
Lovely man.
Yes. And his daughter as well. Very.
Kira.
Kira, lovely. And got great detail, insight into the person, not as a military man, but as a person. Lovely man. And I mean, it was said of the family, because, and Richard was saying that the Colemans were small but numerous.
That's right.
That they were all small in stature, and there's a lot of them in it. So it's lovely to recognise one of the leaders of the right. No, Bernie, that was a very, very interesting morning.
Yes, it was, wasn't it, Jim? Yeah. Well, of course, as you know, I grew up listening to all these names and all these people, so it's nice to kind of put a face on them, so to speak, and let people know a little bit more about them. But there are, as I said in the beginning, we found at least 26 people, I think, who are buried here, so we couldn't be going around all day.
Well, we intend not to put them on a scroll, isn't that right? We're going to recognise everybody.
The names will all be scrolled, there's names like Stafford and like there's a lot of them around the town still, and different names like that. So, I think we've done our best to honour these men. Well, this, of course, is the Swords of 2016. I don't know what some of these guys would think of it if they were to come back. But the difference is Swords was a market town, hence the big wide street that you will see in the old photographs. That, of course, is the plaque to Richard Coleman, and Coleman's shop was there. His mother kept the shop, and that's the star today, which is sadly going out of the hands of the tailors. They have sold it, I believe. And that is the plaque to Peter Wilson, who was killed in the Mendicity Institute. And he lived up, that's Bridge Street, he lived up there on the green. That's why the plaque was put there.